The Whitmore estate glittered under 1,000 crystal lights as Isabella stood beside her parents, her emerald gown catching the ballroom's golden radiance. The announcement had been made with all the pomp befitting one of New York's oldest families. She was to marry Jonathan Reed, heir to the Reed banking fortune, in what society pages would undoubtedly call the wedding of the century. The engagement ring felt heavy on her finger, its massive diamond reflecting the chandelier's light like trapped tears. Around them, the city's elite raised their glasses in celebration, their voices creating a symphony of congratulations that felt hollow to Isabella's ears. She smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, playing her role as the dutiful daughter who had accepted an advantageous match. But behind her practiced composure, her heart raced with a different rhythm entirely. 3 years had passed since she had last seen Alexander Knight. 3 years since he had vanished from her life without explanation, leaving only a brief note about business obligations abroad. Now, as she stood surrounded by luxury and expectation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. The evening air carried a charge of anticipation that had nothing to do with her engagement announcement. Isabella's thoughts drifted to the letter hidden in her jewelry box upstairs, the one she had read countless times until the paper had grown soft with handling. Alexander's words echoed in her memory, promises of a future together that now seemed like fragments of a dream. Her mother's voice brought her back to the present, introducing her to yet another family friend who wished to congratulate the happy couple. Jonathan stood beside her, his hand possessively placed on her lower back, his smile confident and assured. He was everything her parents had wanted for her, stable, wealthy, socially acceptable. Yet when she looked at him, she felt nothing but a gentle fondness, the kind one might feel for a distant cousin. Her father had made it clear that this marriage was not just about her happiness, but about the family's financial stability. The Whitmore fortune, while impressive to outsiders, had suffered significant losses in recent years. Jonathan's family offered not just social prestige, but the capital needed to restore their standing. Isabella understood the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, the generations of family legacy that depended on her making the right choice. Still, as she accepted another round of congratulations, she found herself scanning the crowd, hoping against hope for a familiar face that she knew wouldn't appear. The conversation around Isabella suddenly died as the ballroom's massive oak doors swung open with deliberate force. A figure stood silhouetted against the hallway's dimmer lighting, and Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Even after 3 years, she would recognize that commanding presence anywhere. Alexander Knight stepped into the ballroom with the same confident stride that had first captured her attention at a charity gala years ago. He had changed. His dark hair was slightly longer, his jawline more defined, and there was a new hardness in his steel-grey eyes that spoke of battles fought and won in the business world. His tailored black suit fit him perfectly, emphasizing the broad shoulders and tall frame that commanded attention without effort. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire as guests recognized the billionaire who had disappeared from New York society 3 years earlier. Isabella's parents exchanged worried glances, her father's face darkening with concern while her mother clutched her pearl necklace nervously. Jonathan's grip on Isabella's waist tightened protectively, though he seemed more confused than threatened by the newcomer's arrival. Alexander's gaze swept the room with calculating precision before settling on Isabella with an intensity that made her knees weak. Time seemed suspended as their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, 3 years of separation dissolving in an instant. Alexander moved through the crowd with purposeful determination, guests instinctively stepping aside to create a path. Isabella felt frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs as memories flooded back. stolen moments in hidden corners of galleries, whispered confessions under starlit skies, the warmth of his hands as they danced at secret midnight gatherings. Her mother appeared beside her, whispering urgently about maintaining composure and not creating a scene. But Isabella barely heard her words, too focused on Alexander's approach to process anything else. The man who had once promised her the world was walking directly toward her on the night she had pledged herself to another. Jonathan stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Isabella and the approaching figure, his chest puffed with the territorial instinct of a man defending his claim. The gesture would have been touching if Isabella's entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Alexander's business empire had grown exponentially during his absence, making him one of the most powerful men in the country. His return to New York had been the subject of financial headlines for weeks, though none had mentioned his intention to attend the Whitmore engagement party. As he drew closer, Isabella could see the familiar scar above his left eyebrow, a reminder of the motorcycle accident from his reckless youth, and she felt herself transported back to simpler times when love seemed possible. Alexander stopped mere feet from where Isabella stood with Jonathan, close enough that she could catch the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something new. Success, perhaps, or the weight of years spent building an empire. His presence seemed to electrify the air around them, making every breath feel charged with possibility and danger. Jonathan extended his hand in what appeared to be a gesture of polite introduction, but Alexander's attention remained fixed solely on Isabella. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same rich timbre she remembered, though there was a new edge of authority that came with commanding boardrooms and international negotiations. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved history. Isabella found herself cataloguing the changes in his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions, the slight tightening of his jaw that suggested he had learned to guard his emotions more carefully. Yet underneath these changes, she could still see traces of the man who had once told her she was his entire world. Her parents watched nervously from nearby, clearly calculating the potential social disaster unfolding before their carefully planned celebration. The other guests had formed a loose circle around them, pretending to continue their conversations while straining to catch every word of what promised to be the evening's most dramatic moment. Alexander's voice cut through the ballroom's murmur like a blade through silk, each word deliberate and carrying the weight of absolute conviction. His declaration rang out clear and unmistakable, causing audible gasps from the surrounding guests and sending shockwaves through the carefully orchestrated evening. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before an entire society, a bold claim that defied convention and expectation. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face as the implications of his statement crashed over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a declaration of love, it was a public claiming, a line drawn in the sand that would force her to choose between the safe path her family had laid out and the uncertain but passionate future Alexander represented. Jonathan's face flushed red with indignation and embarrassment, his hand instinctively moving to Isabella's elbow as if to physically anchor her to his side. Her parents looked mortified, her mother's face pale with shock, while her father's expression darkened with barely contained anger. The engagement party that was supposed to cement Isabella's future had suddenly become a battleground where her heart's desires clashed with family duty and social obligation. Around them, the cream of New York society watched with rapt attention, already calculating how this scandal would affect their own social positions and business relationships. Isabella realized that whatever happened next would be witnessed by hundreds of people and would likely be the subject of gossip columns for months to come. Isabella felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, leaving her suspended between two completely different futures. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, each syllable carrying the promise of a love she had thought lost forever, while Jonathan's presence beside her represented security, family approval, and the fulfillment of duty. The weight of hundreds of eyes upon her made the decision feel even more impossible. She could hear her mother's sharp intake of breath, could sense her father's tension radiating across the small space that separated them. This was more than a personal choice. It was a decision that would affect her family's financial stability, their social standing, and their carefully constructed plans for the future. Alexander stood waiting for her response with the patience of a man who had learned to navigate high-stakes negotiations, yet she could see the vulnerability beneath his composed exterior. 3 years of separation had not diminished the connection between them. If anything, the enforced distance had only intensified the pull she felt toward him. Jonathan, meanwhile, looked between Isabella and Alexander with growing comprehension, his initial confusion giving way to the realization that he was not just facing a social interruption, but a genuine threat to his future happiness. The young banker had entered into this engagement with genuine affection for Isabella, and the prospect of losing her to another man, especially under such public circumstances, was clearly devastating to his pride and his heart. The memories came flooding back unbidden as Isabella looked into Alexander's eyes, stolen afternoons in his private garden where they had shared their dreams and fears, quiet dinners at hidden restaurants where they could be themselves without the weight of family expectations, the night he had promised her that nothing would ever come between them. She remembered the way he used to trace patterns on her palm while they talked about their future together, how he had planned to ask her father for her hand in marriage before his business crisis had torn him away from New York. The pain of his sudden departure had nearly broken her, leaving her to wonder if what they had shared had been real or merely a beautiful illusion. Her parents had been surprisingly supportive during those dark months, helping her heal by gradually introducing the idea of Jonathan as a suitable partner. The banker had been patient and kind, courting her with gentle persistence until she had convinced herself that a marriage based on friendship and mutual respect could be enough. But now, seeing Alexander again, feeling the electric pull of his presence, she realized that she had simply been lying to herself. The love she felt for him hadn't died during their separation. It had merely gone into hibernation, waiting for the right moment to reawaken with devastating force. The question now was whether love alone could overcome the practical realities that had separated them before, and whether she had the courage to risk everything for a second chance at happiness. Isabella's father stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of generations of Whitmore tradition and the weight of family honor. His words were measured but firm, reminding everyone present of the commitments that had been made and the expectations that came with their social position. The engagement to Jonathan wasn't merely a personal arrangement. It was a carefully negotiated alliance that would benefit both families for generations to come. He spoke of duty, of responsibility, of the obligations that came with privilege and position in society. Her mother nodded in agreement, her eyes pleading with Isabella to consider the broader implications of any rash decision. They had weathered financial storms before, but this marriage represented their best hope for long-term stability and continued prominence in New York society. Jonathan, to his credit, remained silent during this family discussion, though his jaw was set with determination and his eyes never left Isabella's face. The young banker understood that he was fighting not just for his bride, but for his own future happiness and social standing. Alexander listened to the family patriarch's words with the respect due to an elder, but his expression remained unchanged. He had faced down corporate raiders and international competitors. A concerned father, however formidable, was not going to deter him from claiming the woman he loved. The guests around them had moved closer, no longer pretending to maintain their own conversations as the drama unfolded before them. Alexander reached into his jacket and withdrew a set of documents that he placed carefully on the nearby table, his movements deliberate and confident. The papers represented more than just legal agreements. They were proof of his commitment to Isabella and his willingness to address the practical concerns that had driven them apart 3 years earlier. He had spent those years not just building his fortune, but specifically structuring his business empire to provide the kind of stability and security that would satisfy even the most demanding family expectations. The contracts outlined a merger proposal that would not only solve the Whitmore family's financial difficulties, but would actually enhance their position in New York society significantly. Isabella's father examined the documents with growing amazement, his expression shifting from suspicion to calculation to grudging respect. The terms were more than generous, they were transformative. Alexander had clearly done his research, understanding exactly what the Whitmore family needed and positioning himself as the solution to all their problems. But more than that, he had demonstrated his commitment to Isabella by spending 3 years preparing for this moment, building not just a fortune, but a foundation for their future together. Jonathan watched this exchange with growing dismay, realizing that he couldn't possibly compete with this level of preparation and determination. The documents represented more than financial security. They represented a love so deep that it had driven a man to reshape his entire business empire around one goal. Isabella looked at the documents, then at her parents' changing expressions, then finally at Jonathan's face, which showed a mixture of disappointment and resigned understanding. The young banker had always known that Isabella's heart wasn't fully committed to their engagement, though he had hoped that time and patience might change that. Now, faced with the reality of her true feelings and Alexander's overwhelming gesture, he stepped back with the dignity of a man who recognized when he had been outmaneuvered by a superior force. Isabella felt a surge of gratitude toward him for his grace in this impossible situation. With trembling fingers, she reached for the engagement ring that had felt so heavy on her finger throughout the evening. The massive diamond caught the ballroom's light one final time before she gently placed it in Jonathan's palm, her eyes conveying an apology that words could never adequately express. The gesture sent a ripple of shock through the assembled guests, but Isabella no longer cared about their opinions or the scandal this would create in tomorrow's society pages. For 3 years, she had tried to convince herself that duty and family loyalty were more important than personal happiness. But Alexander's return had shattered that carefully constructed lie. She realized that some choices couldn't be made based on logic or social expectation. They had to be made from the heart, regardless of the consequences. As she stepped away from Jonathan and toward Alexander, she felt as though she was finally stepping into her authentic life. Alexander opened his arms, and Isabella stepped into his embrace without hesitation, feeling for the first time in 3 years that she was exactly where she belonged. The ballroom around them seemed to fade away as they held each other, 3 years of separation dissolving in the warmth of their reunion. His voice was soft as he whispered words meant only for her ears, promises that this time nothing would separate them, assurances that he had learned from their past mistakes and was prepared to fight for their future together. Isabella felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face as she realized that the love she had tried so hard to bury was not only alive, but stronger than ever. The guests around them watched with varying degrees of shock, approval, and scandalized fascination, but Isabella found that she no longer cared about their opinions. Her parents stood nearby, her father still examining Alexander's business proposal with growing respect, while her mother clutched her husband's arm, torn between social embarrassment and genuine happiness for her daughter. The documents on the table represented more than just financial security. They were proof that Alexander had spent every day of their separation working toward a future where they could be together without compromising her family's well-being. As they stood together in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the cream of New York society, Isabella felt as though she was finally free to be herself. The engagement party had become something entirely different. A celebration of true love, triumphant over social convention and family pressure. As the initial shock wore off, the ballroom gradually transformed from a scene of scandal into something approaching celebration. While some guests undoubtedly whispered about propriety and social conventions, many others found themselves charmed by the romantic drama they had witnessed. Isabella's parents, having reviewed Alexander's comprehensive business proposal, began to understand that their daughter's happiness and their family's financial security were not mutually exclusive after all. Her father approached the couple with grudging admiration, extending his hand to Alexander with the acknowledgement that sometimes love and practical concerns could align in unexpected ways. Jonathan, meanwhile, had quietly excused himself from the party, handling his disappointment with the dignity befitting his character, though not before wishing Isabella genuine happiness in her choice. The orchestra, taking their cue from the shifting mood, began playing a romantic waltz, and Alexander led Isabella onto the dance floor for their first dance in 3 years. As they moved together to the music, Isabella felt the last of her doubts dissolve, replaced by a certainty that she had made the right choice despite the unconventional circumstances. The ballroom that had begun the evening as the stage for a dutiful engagement had become the setting for a love story that would be talked about in New York society for years to come. Looking into Alexander's eyes as they danced, Isabella knew that this time their love would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. Strengthened by the trials they had already overcome and the commitment they had both demonstrated to making their future together a reality. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We hope Isabella and Alexander's journey touched your heart and reminded you that true love is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. Stories like these connect us all through the universal experiences of love, family, and the courage to follow our hearts. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please tell us where you're from and what part of this story resonated most with you. Whether you're writing from New York, Tokyo, São Paulo, London, or anywhere else in the world, your thoughts and reactions help make these stories come alive. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed Isabella's choice to follow her heart, and subscribe for more romantic stories that celebrate the power of love over convention.